Three poor triplets visit their mother's grave, but a young billionaire shows up and they ask, "What are you doing here?" He answers, "This is my wife's grave." What they discover next changes their lives forever. The sun had not yet risen when three small silhouettes moved through the narrow hallway of the wooden house. Three pairs of bare feet stepped carefully on the creaking floor, trying not to wake their grandmother sleeping in the room next door. "Shh," whispered Claire, the triplet who always woke up first. Her bright eyes surveyed the dark kitchen before signaling her sisters to follow. Anne and Sophie tiptoed closer, exchanging knowing smiles. All three had the same wavy brown hair and bighorn expressive eyes, but anyone who knew them realized they were as different as stars in the night sky. "Let's surprise Grandma," said Sophie, the dreamiest of the three, as she grabbed a small, worn wooden stool to reach the cupboard. The girls worked in silence, with the synchronicity only triplets can have. Claire carefully cracked the eggs. Anne mixed the pancake batter, and Sophie searched for the fruit their grandmother had stored in the little pantry. Morning light began to slip through the cracks of the window, illuminating their busy little hands. Sunbeams finally entered through the kitchen window when Grandma Margaret appeared in the doorway, still tying her faded robe around her waist. "What's going on here?" she asked, trying to sound stern, but a smile was already breaking through at the corners of her mouth. "Surprise!" the girls shouted in unison. The table was set with three lopsided pancakes, unevenly cut fruit, and glasses of juice with generous amounts of sugar. Grandma Margaret looked at the scene and, for a moment, felt her heart tighten. Her granddaughters, so small and already so determined to take care of her. It should be the other way around. She should be the one taking care of them. "Come, Grandma," Anne called, pulling her by the hand toward the chair they had decorated with a colorful drawing. "It's your special day." Margaret smiled, confused. "My special day? It's mail day," Claire explained naturally. "And letters are special, aren't they?" Her grandmother's smile flickered for a second, but she regained it quickly. The girls were right. It was the day the mailman delivered the monthly envelope Elise sent. The same envelope Margaret opened with trembling hands when the girls were asleep, which contained a few bills and the same short note, written in her daughter's rushed handwriting. "Thank you so much, my princesses," she said, sitting at the makeshift table. "This is the best surprise in the world." The block where they lived was in the humblest part of town. The houses were small and in need of fresh paint, but everyone took care of their yards and helped each other when they could. Everyone knew the triplets' story, or at least the version that circulated among neighbors, that their mother had gone overseas to work, sending money whenever possible. That fall afternoon, the girls were playing in the small front yard. Sophie was drawing on the cement floor with colored chalk, while Anne and Claire argued over the rules of a brand new game they'd just invented. The mailman turned the corner on his blue bicycle, and all three pairs of eyes looked his way at once. The man smiled, already used to such a warm reception. "Mr. Mike," Claire called, running to the gate. "Do you have anything for us today?" The mailman removed his fogged-up glasses and pretended to search his bag. "Let's see. I have a letter for Mrs. Margaret Green." Could that be the same Margaret I know? The three girls jumped up and down with excitement. Sophie dropped the chalk, smearing her dress. Anne clapped her hands, and Claire reached out to grab the envelope. "We'll take it to her. Don't worry." The mailman hesitated for a moment, looking at the envelope with a foreign stamp. "I'd better deliver it straight to your grandmother, little one. Those are the rules." The girls pouted in disappointment, but soon they were running inside, shouting, "Grandma, Mr. Mike brought a letter from Mom." Margaret appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on her apron. Her eyes met the mailman's view, who gave her a discreet nod. She understood the silent message. Another month, another letter, another secret to keep. "Thank you, Mike," she said, taking the envelope and tucking it quickly into her apron pocket. "Would you like some coffee?" "Not today, Margaret. I have a lot more deliveries to make." The mailman knelt to look the girls in the eyes. "And you threes keep helping your grandma, okay?" The triplets promised they would, waving as the mailman pedaled away. Margaret looked at the envelope in her pocket and felt that familiar weight of guilt. Later, when the girls were asleep, she would open the letter, put the money in the old tea tin high atop the cupboard, and hide the note with all the others, locked away in her dresser drawer. The triplets' bedroom was small but cozy. 3 narrow beds with colorful quilts that Margaret had sewn by hand. On the wall, drawings of 3 little girls holding hands with a taller figure, the mother they barely remembered, but who filled their dreams and conversations. "Tell us more about Mom," Sophie asked, while Grandma braided her hair before bed. Margaret sighed. It was always the same question, every night. "Your mother is working very far away," she began, repeating the story she had told hundreds of times, "in a place where people speak differently and eat strange foods." "Like spinach quiche?" Anne asked, making a face. Her grandmother laughed, thankful for the interruption. "Even worse than spinach quiche. And she's saving money so that one day she can come back and take you girls to see the world." "Why doesn't she send pictures?" Claire asked, ever the most observant. "Jenny at school gets pictures from her dad who works on ships." Margaret finished braiding Sophie's hair and sent her off to bed. "Some people don't like to take pictures, sweetheart." "But how will we recognize her when she comes back?" Claire insisted. "I almost don't remember what she looks like anymore." Grandma swallowed hard. Claire always asked the toughest questions. "You'll recognize her," she promised. "A mother and daughter always recognize each other, no matter how long it's been." Once everyone was tucked in, Margaret sat on the old rocking chair between the beds. As she did every night, she picked up the tiny music box on the nightstand, the only gift Elise had ever left for her daughters. "Can I wind it tonight?" Anne asked, holding out her hand. Grandma passed her the box. Anne turned the little golden key carefully, as if it were the most precious object in the world. When the music began to play, a soft, melancholy melody, the 3 girls closed their eyes, each imagining in her own way what their mother was like. The mother they'd last seen when they were so small, they could hardly form memories. "Do you think she still thinks of us?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret felt her heart clench. "Every day, my love. Every single day." She remained there, gently rocking, until the 3 were breathing deeply, lost in sleep. Only then, with silent steps, did she go to her room, take the key she kept on a cord around her neck, and open her dresser drawer. The envelope lay in her apron pocket, still sealed. Margaret opened it carefully, removed the bills, less than the previous month, and the hastily written note. "Take good care of them. I've changed my destination and can't go back." Always the same words, never a "how are they" or "tell them I miss them." Margaret put the money in the tea tin and the note with all the others. She sat on the edge of the bed and let a single tear roll down her wrinkled face. The school was a 15-minute walk from the house. Every morning, Margaret took the triplets to the gate, carrying the 3 worn backpacks she'd found at a garage sale. "Behave and learn a lot," she told them, kissing each one on the forehead. "Will you be here when we're done?" Sophie asked, who hated goodbyes. "Like always," their grandma promised. "And today we'll have caramel pudding for dessert." The girls ran inside, the promise of pudding making them forget any sadness. Margaret watched until they disappeared among the other children, then turned back toward home. Her night shift at the corner diner was over, and now she had to clean the house, buy groceries, and cook lunch before returning to pick them up. She looked up at the overcast sky. Life wasn't easy, but they were getting by. The money Elise sent helped, but it wasn't enough. Margaret worked 2 shifts at the diner and did sewing jobs for some wealthy families in town. Her hands were always tired, her eyes heavy with sleep, but she never complained. The girls deserved a better life than what they had now. They deserved more than empty promises and absence. On her way back, she passed by the small park where the triplets liked to play on weekends. She sat for a moment on one of the benches, allowing herself a little rest. She took out 3 small colored ribbons she'd bought at a craft store. A blue one for Claire, a green one for Anne, and a pink one for Sophie. She'd saved coins for weeks to buy this little treat. The girls would be so happy. Margaret smiled, putting the ribbons away. People looked at her and saw just a tired, older woman raising 3 granddaughters. No one knew the burden she carried, the lies she told every night to protect the children from the truth about the mother who had abandoned them. "Grandma, our teacher asked us to bring family photos for a project," Claire announced, throwing her backpack onto the couch when they returned from school. Margaret froze for a second, the spoonful of pudding suspended in mid-air. Family photos. We're supposed to make a family tree, Anne explained. Everyone has to bring pictures. Their grandmother served the pudding in silence, thinking quickly. They had so few photos, and almost none with Elise. We can look in the memory box after dinner, she promised. That afternoon, while the girls played in the backyard, Margaret climbed up into the small, dusty attic. The memory box was hidden under piles of old clothes. She opened it carefully, rummaging through the few photographs she had kept. She found one where Elise, still a teenager, held the newborn triplets at the hospital. Her face was turned away, looking out of frame, as if already thinking of leaving. Margaret put that picture back in the box. It wouldn't do. She found another from the girl's second birthday. Elise was there, but her face wore that same distant expression. Margaret sighed. Perhaps it would be better to make up an excuse, say they didn't have enough photos. Just as she was about to give up, she found an envelope at the bottom of the box with pictures from Elise's graduation. In those photos, her daughter was smiling, young and full of hope, before getting pregnant, before feeling trapped in a life she didn't want. Margaret took one of these pictures, along with a few photos of the triplets playing in the yard. It would have to be enough. After dinner, the girls were in the living room cutting pieces of colored paper for their family tree project. "I found some pictures we can use," Margaret said, showing the ones she'd selected. The three gathered around her, examining the images curiously. "Is this Mom?" Sophie asked, pointing to Elise in the graduation photo. "Yes," Grandma confirmed. "That's when she finished school." "She looks happy," observed Anne. Margaret nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. She was very happy that day. Claire took the photo and studied it more closely. "And are we the ones here?" She pointed to a picture of the three in a small inflatable pool in the yard. "That's right. You were 3 years old." "Did Mom take that picture?" Sophie asked hopefully. Margaret hesitated for just a second. "Yes, sweetheart. She loved taking pictures of you playing." The girls smiled, satisfied with the answer. They went back to working on their family tree, gluing the photos onto colored paper and drawing lines to connect the family members. "Done!" Anne exclaimed after a while, holding it up for all to see. "Our family." Margaret looked at the paper. At the top, they had pasted the photo of Elise. Below, they had drawn 3 little girls holding hands. And next to them, in colorful marker, they had drawn an older figure with gray hair, the grandmother. "It's beautiful," Margaret said, swallowing the lump in her throat. "It's only missing Dad," Claire commented. "Doesn't everyone have one?" Their grandmother felt her blood run cold. This was the question she had always dreaded. "Not all families are the same, honey," she explained calmly. "Some have a mom and a dad, others only a mom or only a dad, and others, like ours, have a grandma and a mom who works far away." The girls seemed to think about that. "But how were we born without a dad?" Claire persisted, always the one with the tough questions. Margaret took a deep breath. "You did have one, but he left before you were born. He didn't know your mum was expecting you." It was a half-truth, Margaret thought. Elise had never revealed who their father was, and Margaret had never pushed her for details. "Is he ever coming back?" Sophie asked, forever the dreamer. "No, sweetheart. He doesn't know about you. So it's just us," Anne concluded, looking at the incomplete family tree. "Just the 4 of us. And that's not a bad thing," Margaret declared, hugging the 3 of them. "Some of the best families are small." Claire, however, did not look convinced. "But Mom will come back, right?" Margaret gazed into the hopeful eyes of her granddaughters. How could she say no that their mother had chosen another life? How could she destroy the hope that kept them dreaming? "One day," she answered, feeling the weight of the lie. "One day she'll come back." Later that night, once the girls were finally asleep, Margaret returned to the living room. She picked up the family tree they had made and looked at it for a long time. Carefully, she opened the desk drawer and took out a pen. Next to the drawing of the grandmother, she added little hearts, because that was what they had. Not a big or conventional family, but one that, despite everything, was full of love. Margaret looked at the project one more time before placing it in Anne's backpack for school the next day. The questions were getting harder. The girls were growing up. Soon, the story of a mom working far away wouldn't be enough. Another lie, she thought. Another day protecting Elise's secret. How much longer could she keep this up? How much longer could she shield the girls from the truth that, one day, would inevitably have to be revealed? It was a grey morning when the phone rang. Margaret was in the kitchen preparing the girls' breakfast. She wiped her hands on her apron before answering. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was formal, distant. Margaret leaned against the wall as she listened. Her face went pale. When she hung up, she stood there for several minutes, still holding the phone, staring into nowhere. "Grandma, are you okay?" Claire was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching her grandmother with worried eyes. Margaret forced a smile. "Yes, dear. Go get your sisters for breakfast." The girls walked into the kitchen a little later, still in their pajamas, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They ate in silence, sensing something was different. Their grandmother barely touched her plate. "You have art class today, right?" Margaret asked, trying to sound normal. "Don't forget to bring your supplies." The girls nodded, exchanging confused looks. Something was wrong, but they didn't know what. That night, after dinner, Margaret sat at the table with a cup of tea. She stared at the calendar on the wall for a long time. How would she tell the girls? How would she explain that the mother they longed for every day was never coming back? Weeks went by. Margaret kept the news to herself, just as she kept the letters in the locked drawer. She had no courage to speak. The girls kept asking about their mother, and she kept making up excuses. Meanwhile, the weight of the secret ate away at her from the inside. One afternoon, while the triplets watched TV, Margaret went to her room. She opened the drawer where she kept all of Elise's letters. She reread each one, searching for some clue, some sign she might have missed. Nothing, only the same cold words. "Take good care of them. I've changed my destination and can't go back." Then she realized she could no longer delay. The girls deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful. The following Sunday, Margaret asked the triplets to dress in their best clothes. "Are we going out?" Sophie asked excitedly. "Yes," her grandmother replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "We have something important to do today." The girls got ready quickly, thinking it might be a special outing, maybe a picnic in the park or a visit to an ice cream parlor. They put on their favorite dresses, and Margaret tied their hair with the colored ribbons she had bought months before. When they were all set, Grandma called them into the living room. "We need to talk," she said, sitting down on the couch and motioning for them to do the same. Anne, Claire, and Sophie sat side by side, looking at their grandmother with anticipation. Margaret took a deep breath before she began. "Remember how I've always told you that your mom was working far away?" 3 heads nodded in unison. "Well, that wasn't the whole truth." She paused, searching for the right words. "Your mother, she left by her own choice. She thought you would have a better life here with me." The girls stayed quiet, absorbing the information. Claire was the first to speak. "So she wasn't working in another country?" "No, dear." "She didn't want to be our mom anymore?" Anne asked, her voice small and trembling. Margaret felt her heart tighten. "It's not that simple. Your mom was very young when you were born. She wasn't ready to be a mother, but she cared about you. That's why she sent money every month, to help take care of you." "So she's coming back someday?" Sophie asked, still hopeful. That was the moment Margaret felt tears escape. She took the hands of all 3 girls. "No, my love. Your mom, she had an accident. She passed away a few weeks ago." A hush fell over them. The girls looked at their grandmother as if they couldn't understand what she was saying. "Does passed away mean she died?" Sophie asked quietly. Margaret nodded, unable to speak. "Like our turtle," Sophie persisted. "She went to heaven and isn't coming back." "Yes, sweetheart, just like the turtle." Tears began to stream down Sophie's face. Anne hugged her, also crying. Claire stood still, pale, no tears falling. "Why didn't you tell us before?" she asked, her voice strangely calm. "I was trying to protect you," Margaret explained. "I thought you were too young to understand, that it would be better if you believed she would come back one day." Claire stood up from the couch. "You lied to us." "Claire," Grandma began. "You lied!" the girl shouted, tears finally spilling over. "You said she'd come back, you promised." Margaret wrapped her arms around her granddaughter, feeling her small body shake with sobs. Soon, Anne and Sophie joined the embrace. The four of them stayed that way for a long time, crying together, for the mother who left, for the truth that hurt, and for the promises that would never be fulfilled. Later that day, all four of them were in a taxi on their way to the cemetery. Margaret had explained that it was important to say goodbye, that it would help them understand their mother was really gone. The cemetery was a peaceful place, with tall trees and colorful flowers, not at all the scary place the girls had imagined. Margaret held a small bouquet of white lilies, Elise's favorite flowers, she explained. They walked along a stone path until they reached a simple headstone. It bore the full name of their mother, Elise Green, along with her birth and death dates. "This is where she is now," Margaret said softly. The girls stared at the stone in silence. It was hard to believe that the mother they had imagined for so many years, the almost mythical figure of their fantasies, was there beneath the ground. "Can we leave flowers for her?" Anne asked. "Of course," her grandmother replied, handing them the lilies to place on the grave. Sophie knelt down and touched the engraved letters on the stone. "Can she hear us?" "Some people believe so," Margaret said. "Hi, Mum," Sophie whispered. "It's Sophie. Do you remember me?" Anne knelt beside her sister. "And I'm Anne. We miss you." Claire remained standing a short distance away. She was still angry. Angry at her grandma for lying, angry at her mother for leaving, angry at the world for being so unfair. "Don't you want to talk to Mom?" Sophie asked. Claire shook her head. "She can't hear us. She's dead." Margaret didn't scold Claire. She knew each of them would deal with their loss in their own way. The important thing was that they were there, together, facing the truth. They stayed in the cemetery for almost an hour. Margaret shared a few stories about Elise's youth, how she used to climb trees, how she sang in the shower, how she laughed loudly when something was truly funny. The girls listened attentively, trying to form a more real image of the mother they hardly knew. Before leaving, Margaret took 3 small porcelain angels out of her purse, one for each girl. "So you'll remember that, wherever she is, your mom is always an angel watching over you." The girls held the angels carefully. Even Claire, still silent, put hers in her dress pocket. On the way back home, nobody spoke much. But the silence was no longer filled with secrets. It was a silence of acceptance, the beginning of healing. A year had passed since that day at the cemetery. Life went on, like the changing seasons that brought rain and sun, cold and heat. The triplets grew older, their faces losing a bit of that childlike roundness, their eyes gaining a new understanding. The house remained the same, small, cozy, full of drawings on the walls and toys on the floor. Margaret still worked hard, caring for her granddaughters with all the love she could give. It was a Saturday afternoon, the anniversary of Elise's death. Margaret mentioned she would visit the cemetery the following day, Sunday, when she had a day off from the diner. The triplets listened quietly, without comment. After lunch, Margaret retreated for a well-deserved rest. She'd worked all night and could barely keep her eyes open. "Grandma's sleeping," Claire whispered, peeking through the crack in the bedroom door. Anne and Sophie looked at each other. The 3 had agreed, in secret, on a special visit. "Shall we go now?" Sophie asked. Claire nodded. She picked up the backpack she had prepared earlier. Inside was a colorful drawing they had made together. It was a portrait of the family, the 3 girls, their grandmother, and in the sky among the clouds, their mother as an angel. "Let's bring flowers too," Anne suggested, pointing to the small front garden. Quietly, the 3 went to the garden. They picked some yellow daisies. It wasn't much, but it was what they had. Anne tied them together with a piece of ribbon she kept in her pocket. "How are we going to get there?" Sophie asked worriedly. "It's far." "By bus," Claire said confidently. "I saw which bus Grandma took last time." Anne looked unsure. "Are you sure we should go without telling Grandma?" "She'll be worried," Sophie agreed. Claire crossed her arms. "We'll leave a note. Besides, we'll go and come back quickly. She won't even notice we left." The 3 agreed and left a note on the kitchen table. "We went to visit Mom. We'll be right back. Love, Claire, Anne, and Sophie." The bus ride wasn't complicated. The girls sat together in the back, the drawing and the flowers on their laps. Sophie looked out the window anxiously. Anne held her hand for support. Claire stayed serious, determined. They got off at the right stop and walked to the cemetery entrance. The place seemed different without their grandmother, bigger, quieter, more solemn. "Do you remember where it is?" Anne asked. Claire nodded. "This way." They followed the stone path, trying to remember the route. They passed several headstones, some with fresh flowers, others abandoned. Finally, Claire pointed, "There." Elise Green's headstone was as they remembered, simple, without adornments. But something was different. There was someone else there. A young man in elegant clothes, standing before the grave, holding a single white rose. The girls stopped, unsure what to do. Should they wait for him to leave? Come back later. "Who is he?" Sophie whispered. "I don't know," Claire answered. "I've never seen him before." The man seemed lost in thought, gazing at the headstone with an expression that was part sadness, part confusion. He didn't notice the girl's presence until they were only a few steps away. Sophie, ever impulsive, was the first to speak. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice echoing in the cemetery's stillness. The man turned around, startled. He seemed surprised to see 3 identical little girls looking at him curiously. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. This is my wife's grave," he finally replied. The triplets exchanged confused looks. "That can't be," Claire said. "This is our mum's grave." The man looked from the headstone to the girls repeatedly, as if trying to solve a complicated puzzle. "Your mother," he repeated. "Elise Green was your mother." "Yes," the 3 answered in unison. The man, Thomas, turned pale. He knelt down to be at eye level with the girls. His eyes scanned each face, searching for Elise's features, signs that they were telling the truth. And those features were there, the shape of their eyes, their smiles, even the way they tilted their heads when curious. It was undeniable. She was my wife," he said, his voice more controlled now but still slightly trembling. "I didn't know she had daughters." "She never said anything." The girls looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Anne spoke up, her voice gentle. "Did you know our mum?" Thomas looked at the girl, feeling a knot in his throat. How could he explain that, yes, he had known Elise, or thought he did? How to say he'd been married to her for 2 years, shared a life, plans, dreams, yet never knew she had 3 daughters somewhere? "Yes, I knew Elise," he said at last, his gaze distant. "But I guess I didn't really know her." His words hung in the air. Anne, Sophie, and Claire stared at this stranger, trying to process the information. If he was married to their mother, did that make him a stepfather, some sort of relative, someone important? "Why didn't she ever tell you about us?" Claire asked, always direct. Thomas shook his head. "I don't know. I really don't." "Maybe she was ashamed," Sophie suggested in a small voice. "No," Thomas replied quickly. "It's impossible to be ashamed of children as special as you." Anne took a step forward, holding out the small bunch of daisies. "We brought these for her. Can you put them with your rose?" Thomas took the flowers gently, as if they were something precious. "Of course." He placed the daisies next to the white rose at the center of the gravestone. The simple backyard flowers contrasted with the perfect florist's rose, but together they formed an arrangement that felt right somehow. "We also brought this," Claire said, taking a drawing out of her backpack. "We made it together." Thomas took the paper and examined it. It showed 3 girls, an older woman with grey hair, and an angelic figure in the sky. The lines were childlike but full of emotion. At the bottom, 3 signatures: Claire, Anne, and Sophie. "It's very beautiful," he said, giving it back. "I'm sure she would have liked it." Claire placed the drawing under the flowers, weighting it down with a small stone to keep it from blowing away. They stood there in silence for a few moments, a strange kind of family brought together by someone who had connected them in ways they couldn't have imagined. Thomas slowly stood up, still reeling from the revelation. "I have to go," he said, his voice distant. "It was nice to meet you." He gave a quiet farewell and began to walk away. He took a few steps, then stopped and glanced back. The three girls were kneeling by the gravestones, whispering things he couldn't hear. The image struck him with surprising force. Those children were part of Elise, part of someone he had loved deeply. Thomas shook his head, still in disbelief. How could it be? How had Elise kept this secret? What else had she hidden? He watched the girls for a few more minutes. They stood up and prepared to leave. Without much thought, Thomas followed them from a distance. He didn't know why, but he felt he needed to know more about them, about the life Elise had left behind. The triplets walked to the bus stop, chatting excitedly about the strange encounter. They seemed so free, so innocent, completely unaware of the emotional whirlwind their meeting had stirred in Thomas. He waited for them to board, then took the same bus, sitting several rows behind. No one noticed him. The girls were busy discussing the drawing they'd left, wondering if their mother could see it from where she was, asking whether the strange man was really her husband. Thomas watched the scenery change outside the window, from a nicer part of town to increasingly modest neighborhoods. The girls got off in a humble area with small houses and well-kept gardens. He got off too, keeping a safe distance. The three walked down a narrow street and entered a light blue wooden house with a little front yard, the same yard they had picked daisies from. Thomas stood on the opposite side of the street, staring at the house. It was so different from the mansion where he and Elise had lived. A whole other world. What had made Elise abandon her daughters? Why had she never mentioned them? Could it be that she had planned to return one day? Suddenly, an older woman appeared at the front window, grey hair in a simple bun, face marked by time. She looked out anxiously, probably having just realized the girls had gone out without permission. Thomas saw how all three ran to hug her. He saw the relief on the older woman's face, the love in her eyes. This must be the grandmother, the person who had raised Elise's daughters, the one who stayed behind when Elise decided to leave. He felt a knot in his chest. That family, so different from his own, seemed so close, so genuinely loving. Thomas was a wealthy, powerful man, used to getting everything he wanted. Yet at that moment, watching through the window, he felt strangely empty. He left without saying a word, but the image of that family remained etched in his mind. He returned to his luxurious house, to his life of privilege, but something within him had changed. In the days that followed, Thomas tried to continue his normal routine. Meetings, business, social commitments, everything seemed the same, but nothing felt the same. His thoughts kept drifting to those three identical little girls, the older woman at the window, the blue house with the daisy garden. One night, alone in his study, Thomas took out one of the photos of Elise he kept in a drawer. He gazed at the face of the woman he had loved, searching for any sign, any clue of the secret she'd kept. "Why, Elise?" he asked aloud. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Of course, there was no answer. Only the silence of the night and the weight of a discovery that had turned his life upside down. Thomas knew he should let it go, move on. Those girls weren't his responsibility. He wasn't even certain if he believed they were truly Elise's daughters, though the resemblance was undeniable. But something kept him from simply forgetting. Perhaps it was curiosity, or a sense of duty toward Elise's memory. Or maybe it was the recollection of those three pairs of eyes looking at him so innocently at the cemetery. Thomas closed the photo of Elise in the drawer and made a decision. He would find out more about the triplets. He would try to understand why Elise had abandoned her own daughters, and maybe, just maybe, he would find some peace in the process. Gazing out of his study window at the city below, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. Anne, Claire, and Sophie. Three names he couldn't get out of his head. Three little girls who had appeared in his life like ghosts from Elise's past. Three tiny mysteries he felt compelled to unravel. Thomas didn't know what the future held, nor how this discovery would change his life. But he knew with inexplicable certainty that his meeting those children at the cemetery was no coincidence, and that, in some way, fate had placed them in his path for a reason. The question was, would he be ready to find out why? Thomas entered his mansion and tossed his keys onto the marble table in the foyer. The sound echoed through the empty space. Since Elise's death, the house felt too big, too cold. But today, after the encounter at the cemetery, everything felt different. The walls that had witnessed his marriage to Elise now held a secret he'd never suspected. Thomas climbed the stairs to the bedroom he used to share with his wife. He had left all her belongings untouched, her perfumes on the dressing table, her clothes in the closet, her books on the shelf. The housekeeper had asked many times if she could put everything away, but he always refused. It was his way of keeping her close. Now, however, he looked at those items as if they belonged to a stranger. He sat on the bed and picked up the framed photo from the nightstand. In it, Elise was smiling during their honeymoon. That smile had won him over from the moment they met, and now it seemed to hide so much. "How could you?" he whispered to the photo. "How could you hide something so important?" Thomas set the frame aside and went to the closet. He opened the doors and saw Elise's clothes, all neatly organized by color, all expensive brands he had insisted on giving her. The Elise he knew loved elegant clothes, fancy dinners, and international travel. How could the same woman have 3 small daughters living in a modest house across town? He pulled open a drawer where she kept personal documents. Maybe there was something there that could explain. He sorted through papers, certificates, birthday cards. Nothing about the girls, no clue they existed. Thomas closed the drawer and returned to the bedroom. He sat in the armchair by the window where he used to read before bed. From there he could see the garden Elise loved so much. He remembered how she spent hours tending the roses, how happy she was when they bloomed. Had it been real? Or was it just part of the persona she created? His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his assistant, reminding him of the board meeting the next day. Thomas assured him he'd be there and hung up. How could he focus on business now? 3 daughters, he muttered, still in disbelief. 3 identical little girls. The image of them at the cemetery wouldn't leave his mind. Their curious eyes, their simple yet tidy dresses, the drawing they'd made so lovingly, and that innocent question, "Did you know our mum?" Thomas headed to his office. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. He typed Elise Green and searched. Nothing beyond what he already knew. Some photos from social events, mentions of charity work they did together. No record of her past, of her life before him. When they met, Elise had been working as a receptionist at a luxury hotel. She said she was new in town, that she had come to start fresh. He'd fallen for her calm beauty, her mysterious demeanor. He had never questioned her too much about her past. Maybe he should have. Thomas opened a bottle of whiskey and poured himself a glass. The liquid burned his throat, but did nothing to ease the confusion in his mind. He thought about the girl's grandmother. How must she have felt when Elise left? Was she angry, resentful, or just sad? How did she explain to her granddaughters that their mum wasn't coming back, and the girls? How had they grown up not knowing the truth about their mother, living with made-up stories and empty promises? Thomas took another sip of whiskey. He remembered conversations with Elise about having children. She always dodged the subject, said she wasn't ready yet, that she wanted more time for just the 2 of them. He respected that, never pressed her, and all this time, she already had 3 daughters. "How could you do this to us, Elise?" he asked the empty room. "To them and to me." Thomas ran a tired hand over his face. He was exhausted, but he knew he wouldn't sleep. There were too many unanswered questions, too many conflicting emotions. He walked to the window. The night sky was clear, full of stars. He recalled how Claire had looked at the sky before leaving the cemetery, as if searching for her mother among the constellations. Then something shifted inside him. The anger and confusion didn't vanish, but they gave way to a new feeling: responsibility. Those children were part of Elise. And Elise, despite everything, had been an important part of his life. Thomas closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He couldn't change the past or Elise's choices, but he could do something about those children's future. He sat back down at his desk and grabbed a piece of paper. He wrote down what he knew about the girls. Names: Claire, Anne, Sophie. They lived with their grandmother. A small blue house in the old part of town. They were smart, well-mannered. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He needed to know more, to better understand who they were and what they needed. Thomas glanced at the clock. It was too late to do anything now. Tomorrow, after his meeting, he would go to that house, talk to their grandmother, offer help. He wasn't sure what he would say or how she would react. Maybe she wouldn't even want to see him. Maybe the girls wouldn't remember him, but he had to try. For the first time in a long while, ever since Elise's death, Thomas felt he had a purpose, something beyond business, meetings, and the usual responsibilities. He didn't know what the future might bring, but he was certain of one thing, that meeting in the cemetery was no coincidence, and he couldn't just ignore what he'd discovered. Thomas tucked the paper into his desk drawer and turned off the laptop. Tomorrow would be a new day, the start of a new journey, a journey he felt, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, was his destiny. Thomas parked his imported car at a discreet distance from the blue house. He didn't want to draw attention in that humble neighborhood, where his vehicle stood out like a jewel among ordinary stones. He walked slowly, rehearsing in his mind what he'd say. When he finally reached the small wooden gate, he hesitated. What if the grandmother didn't want to see him? What if the girls were afraid of him? How would he explain his presence there? He took a deep breath and knocked 3 times. He heard children's voices inside and footsteps approaching. The door opened, and the same elderly woman he had seen through the window appeared, wearing an apron and a look of surprise. "Good morning," Thomas said, trying to sound casual. "I'm Thomas. I was married to Elise. I'd like to talk." The grandmother looked him up and down. Her eyes, despite her age, were sharp and filled with suspicion. "How did you find us?" she asked, not moving from the entrance. "I followed the girls from the cemetery," he admitted, opting for honesty. "I'm sorry if that seems strange, but ever since that day, I haven't been able to stop thinking about them, about you." She hesitated, still blocking the doorway. Thomas could sense her caution, as if she were trying to read his intentions. "Grandma, who is it?" A small voice came from inside the house. The older woman sighed and, after a moment that seemed to last forever, stepped aside. "Come in," she said simply. "We were having tea." Thomas walked across the small porch and into the living room. It was modest, yet neat and organized. A worn sofa, a coffee table with many marks, simple curtains but well cared for. The walls were covered with children's drawings taped up with brightly colored tape. Then the 3 girls appeared from the kitchen. Upon seeing him, their eyes went wide with recognition. "It's the man from the cemetery," Sophie exclaimed, the most talkative of the 3. The girls ran up to him, curious but not frightened. Thomas suddenly felt awkward, unsure how to interact with children. "Hello," he said, lowering himself to their eye level. "Do you remember me?" "Your mom's husband," Claire said, examining him with her keen gaze. "You said you didn't know about us." Thomas swallowed. "That's right. I didn't know. And I'm here to understand." The grandmother, who had been watching the scene cautiously, gestured to the small table in the living room. "Let's sit down. Girls, bring another cup for Mr. Thomas." "Just Thomas, please," he corrected gently. The girls ran off to the kitchen, excited by the unexpected visitor. Thomas took a closer look at the living room. There were improvised toys around, rag dolls, a little car made from cans, wooden blocks painted by hand. Along with the drawings, there were also some photos on the walls, pictures of the triplets at different ages, always smiling, always together. Soon, Anne returned with a mismatched ceramic mug. She placed it before Thomas carefully, proud of her task. "It's the special cup," she explained. "We only use it when an important guest comes." The simplicity of that gesture touched him deeply. In his world of luxury and sophistication, a mismatched mug would never be offered to a guest. Here, it was a symbol of honor. The grandmother poured tea, her movements steady and graceful despite the wrinkles on her hard-working hands. "Margaret Green," she finally introduced herself. "Elise's mother." "Thomas Blackwood," he responded. "It's a pleasure to meet you, despite the circumstances." The girls sat on the rug near the table, looking at Thomas like he was a rare creature on display. "Do you have a big house?" Sophie asked. "Sophie!" Their grandmother chided. "Don't be nosy." Thomas smiled. "It's okay, yes, I do have a pretty big house. Too big for just one person, really." "Did Mum live there with you?" Claire asked. Thomas nodded, feeling that familiar knot in his throat. "Yes, for 2 years. Margaret set her cup down and looked directly at Thomas. "Elise never told you about the girls," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Never," he confirmed. "If she had—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken words lingered in the air. If she had told him, everything would have been different. For all of them. Margaret started talking, as if a dam had burst. She explained how Elise had gotten pregnant young, how she'd had the triplets and soon realized she wasn't ready for motherhood, how she'd left the girls with Grandma temporarily, sending money every month but never coming back to see them, how she'd disappeared for years, sending only those short, impersonal notes. "The last I heard before the phone call about her accident was that she'd married some businessman," Margaret finished. "I never imagined one day you'd knock on our door." Thomas listened silently, absorbing every word, every detail of a story that was, in some way, also his. While Grandma spoke, the girls started playing on the floor. Sophie began to draw, Anne lined up colored stones, and Claire flipped through a storybook, occasionally glancing at Thomas. He watched them, fascinated, as if seeing three versions of the same person. Each had her personality, her favorite things, but all carried undeniable traits of Elise, the shape of their eyes, that tilt of the head when focusing, the smile. When Margaret finished, Thomas found himself without words. What could he say? That he was sorry, that he wanted to help. Nothing seemed adequate compared to the magnitude of what he'd just learned. "I didn't come here to judge Elise," he said finally, "nor to interfere in your life. I came because I felt I had to know them better." Margaret studied him with those sharp eyes. "And now that you've met us?" Thomas looked at the girls still playing, oblivious to the adults' conversation. Something shifted within him in that moment, like a key turning in a long-rusted lock. "Now, I'd like to be part of their lives, if you'll let me," he answered sincerely. "I don't know how, or exactly what I can offer, but I feel like I owe it to them. And to myself." Margaret didn't reply immediately. Thomas could see the conflict on her face. She was the guardian of these children, the only constant figure in their lives. He was a stranger, connected to them only through a marriage to the mother who'd left them behind. "They need stability," Margaret finally said, "not promises that won't be kept." "I understand," Thomas nodded, "and I respect that. I won't promise what I can't deliver." At that moment, Claire approached the table, holding her storybook. "Will you read to us?" she asked, extending the book to Thomas. "Grandma always does, but she's tired today." Thomas glanced at Margaret, silently asking for permission. She nodded slightly. "Sure," he said, taking the book. "Let's see. The Princess and the Frog. I know this story." All three girls gathered around as he began to read. Thomas changed his voice for each character, making them laugh with his exaggerated frog croaks. Margaret watched, her tired face softening. That first visit stretched on for hours. When Thomas finally said goodbye, he promised to come back the next day, and he did. And the day after that. In the days that followed, he became a constant presence in the Blue House. He brought simple gifts, new crayons, a puzzle, a storybook, nothing extravagant that might embarrass Margaret. He helped fix the dripping faucet, the loose shelf, the broken step on the porch, small tasks that made a big difference in that humble home. The girls quickly grew fond of him. Thomas showed them how to make paper airplanes that actually flew far, taught them how to plant flower seedlings in the little yard, and invented guessing games that made them laugh until they were breathless. One sunny Sunday, he suggested a picnic. He took them to a nearby park with a simple basket he'd prepared himself, sandwiches, fruit, juice. Margaret went along, as watchful as ever, but starting to relax around him. The triplets' laughter in that park was music to Thomas. Used to the oppressive silence of his mansion, he felt truly alive around them. During a lively round of hide-and-seek, quiet Anne surprised him. When he found her behind a tree, she grabbed his hand and asked in a low voice, "Tommy, can you come back tomorrow?" The nickname, used for the first time, melted something inside him. "Only if we play more hide-and-seek," Thomas replied, smiling. On the way home, Sophie asked the question they all wanted to. "Why did Mum never come back to see us?" Thomas's smile vanished. He glanced at Margaret, who walked a bit ahead, then at the three girls who waited for an answer. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, big ones. But that doesn't mean she didn't love you. Are you going to leave us like she did?" Claire asked bluntly. Thomas stopped walking and knelt to their eye level. "No," he promised firmly. "I'm not leaving. You'll never be alone again." It was an important promise, maybe the most important one he'd ever made. And as he looked into those three faces that resembled Elise's, yet already held a unique place in his heart, Thomas knew it was a promise he would do everything to keep. Thomas parked in front of his mansion and sat in the car for a few minutes. The silence around him was absolute, so different from the girls' house, always full of laughter, chatter, and the sound of little feet running in the hallway. He had spent the entire day with them, helping to plant a small garden in the backyard. His hands, so used to signing contracts and shaking hands with other businessmen, were now covered in dirt. Strangely enough, it made him happy. He entered his house feeling something was off, not with the girls or Margaret, but with himself. What was he doing? Which role was he trying to assume in those children's lives? He poured himself some whiskey and walked to the terrace. The night was clear, and the city lights sparkled below. His life had been perfect until a few weeks ago, or so he thought. A successful career, wealth, respect. Elise's death had been a hard blow, but he was moving on, as he always did, with life's obstacles. Then, the encounter at the cemetery changed everything. Thomas picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. "Robert, it's Thomas. I know it's late, but I need to talk. Can I come over?" Robert Henderson was more than his lawyer. He was a long-time friend, 20 years older, almost a mentor in matters beyond business. If anyone could help him make sense of what he was feeling, it was Robert. 30 minutes later, Thomas was sitting in Robert's cozy library. The lawyer listened intently as Thomas recounted the events of the past few weeks. "So let me get this straight," Robert said when Thomas finished. "You found out that your late wife had 3 daughters she never mentioned. Now you visit these kids regularly, help their grandmother, and are getting more and more involved in their lives." "Exactly," Thomas confirmed. "And I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing." Robert poured a bit more whiskey for them both. "What exactly worries you?" Thomas stared at the amber liquid in his glass. "What if I'm just trying to fill the void Elise left, using these kids as replacements for what I lost?" Robert considered this for a moment. "Maybe there's some truth to that," he admitted. "But life rarely has purely noble motivations, Thomas. Our actions often come from a mix of reasons. The real question is, how do you feel when you're with them?" Thomas didn't have to think long. "At peace. There's a sense of purpose I've never felt before. When Sophie shows me a drawing, or Anne holds my hand on a walk, or Claire asks me questions that catch me off guard, it's like everything finally makes sense." A small smile appeared on Robert's face. "You know, Thomas, sometimes the heart finds what the mind never looked for." The words hung in the air for a moment. "I'm not saying there won't be complications," Robert continued. "There are legal issues to consider. The grandmother is their legal guardian, as I understand, and your involvement, however well-intentioned, needs to be clear to everyone. I don't want to take the girls away from her," Thomas explained quickly. "Margaret has done a remarkable job raising them. I just want to be part of their lives." "And how does their grandmother feel about that?" Thomas thought about it. At first she was suspicious. Now, I think she's getting used to me. She can see I'm not trying to replace her, just help. Robert nodded thoughtfully. "So what do you plan to do long-term? Have you considered that?" The question caught Thomas off guard. The long-term? He hadn't thought that far ahead. He was living week to week, visit to visit. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but I know I want to keep being part of their lives." Robert smiled again. "Then maybe that's what you should do. Stay involved. The rest will come with time." Thomas felt a weight lift off his shoulders. His doubts hadn't vanished completely, but the path forward felt a little clearer now. "Thank you, Robert," he said, finishing his drink. "As always, you help me see things more clearly." "That's what old friends are for," Robert replied, patting him on the shoulder. "Go slowly, but follow your heart." The next morning, Thomas made a decision. If he was going to continue being part of the triplets' lives, he needed to do more than just visit and bring small gifts. He needed to truly contribute to their well-being. He had noticed Margaret often rubbing her back, as if she were in pain. When he asked about it, she brushed it off, saying she was just tired. But Thomas suspected something more serious. "Margaret needs a doctor," he commented to Claire, who seemed the most perceptive of the three. "Grandma doesn't like doctors," the girl replied. "She says they're expensive and asks too many questions." Thomas made a few calls and managed to schedule an appointment with Dr. Phillips, the best orthopedist in the city, and, coincidentally, an old college friend. When he told Margaret, she refused outright. "I appreciate the concern," she said firmly, "but I'm fine and we don't need charity." "It's not charity," Thomas insisted. "It's friendship. Besides, Phil owes me some favors. He'll hardly charge for the consultation." It wasn't true, of course. He would pay the full amount, but Margaret didn't need to know that. After much insistence and with the triplets pleading, "Please, Grandma, go to the doctor," Margaret finally agreed. The diagnosis was worse than Thomas had imagined. Spinal problems requiring regular physical therapy and possibly minor surgery later on. Without treatment, the pain would only grow. Thomas covered all the costs, despite Margaret's protests, but she saw her granddaughter's worried faces and eventually accepted his help, albeit reluctantly. That was the start of deeper changes in that family's life. Thomas realized there were many other ways he could help without wounding Margaret's pride. He noticed the girls' notebooks were worn out, some missing pages. On his next visit, he brought each of them new school supplies. Sophie loved the colorful markers, Anne was thrilled with the drawing pencils, and Claire wouldn't stop tinkering with her new calculator. In casual conversation, Margaret mentioned that the public school they attended was struggling. Overcrowded classrooms, unmotivated teachers, poor facilities. "They're smart," Margaret said proudly. "They could go so much farther with better opportunities." Thomas made some more calls. He knew the head of St. Mary Academy, one of the best private schools in the area. He arranged 3 spots for the next semester, with partial scholarships. He would cover the remainder, of course. When he told Margaret, he expected resistance. Instead, he saw tears in her eyes. "You have no idea what this means," she said. "I always dreamed of giving them a quality education. Elise had the best schools, you know. I worked 3 jobs to pay for it. I wanted the same for the girls, but alone I could never manage." Thomas felt a knot in his throat. "They deserve every opportunity, Margaret." The house also started to change. Thomas knew he had to be subtle. He didn't want to offend Margaret by making big renovations. He began with little things: a new fridge when the old one broke down, new curtains for the living room, a more modern TV to replace the ancient one that barely worked. Over time, other improvements followed: a new washing machine, a bigger dining table, a comfortable sofa. The house grew brighter and more alive. The girls were happy with the changes, but even happier with Thomas's ongoing presence. On weekends, he planned special outings for them. One Saturday, he took them to the children's library, where they spent hours exploring books. Sophie loved the princess stories, Anne preferred animal books, and Claire lost herself in the science section. Another weekend, they visited a vintage toy museum. The girls were amazed by miniature carousels, porcelain dolls, and little trains that still worked. "Look, Tommy," Sophie called out at each new discovery. The nickname had become natural for all of them. He also took them to a nearby lake, where he taught them to skip stones. Claire was the best, managing up to 5 skips with the flat stones she chose carefully. At home, Thomas noticed 3 old bicycles in the backyard shed. "They never learned to ride," Margaret explained. "We got the bikes second-hand, but I lacked the time and patience to teach them." Thomas took on the task with enthusiasm. On Sunday afternoons, he would take each girl outside to the quiet street in front of the house. He held the seat firmly while they pedaled, timid at first, then more confidently. "Don't let go," Anne would shout, the most fearful of the 3. "I'm here," Thomas assured her. "I won't let go until you're ready." Falls were inevitable, but the girls learned quickly. The moment each one finally managed to ride alone was a small victory Thomas cherished. At night, returning to his empty mansion, Thomas felt the difference between the two worlds he now inhabited. The contrast was stark. There, everything was luxurious, spacious, silent. Here, everything was simple, cramped, noisy. Yet he found himself increasingly drawn to the warm chaos of the triplets' home. One evening, he had an idea. He took out his phone and started recording. Once upon a time, there were 3 princesses who lived in a distant kingdom. They weren't ordinary princesses because they had the same face, the same curious eyes, the same smile that brightened everyone's day. He created a short story about courage and friendship, inspired by the triplets. The next day, when he visited the Blue House, he handed his phone to Margaret. "I thought they might like to hear a bedtime story," he explained, looking a little shy. Margaret played the audio that night. The girls listened in complete silence, recognizing Thomas's voice, smiling when they realized the story was about them. "More," Sophie begged when it ended. And so a new tradition was born. Every night, Thomas recorded a story for the triplets. He told tales of brave animals, children overcoming obstacles, and friends helping each other. Each story carried a message of kindness, courage, or love. Margaret noticed that these stories were more than mere entertainment. They were Thomas's way of being present, even when he couldn't visit. The way he spoke to the girls, with genuine respect and affection, showed that his interest went beyond mere curiosity or a sense of duty. Gradually, the grandmother's initial mistrust turned into acceptance, then appreciation, and finally a kind of partnership. Margaret no longer saw Thomas as just the man who had married her daughter, but as someone who truly cared for her granddaughters. One sign of this change came on a rainy Sunday, when Thomas arrived soaked for his usual visit. Margaret welcomed him with a towel and a cup of hot chocolate. "Thank you," he said, surprised by the gesture. Margaret smiled faintly. "It's the least I can do for someone in the family." Her words caught him off guard. Family. Was that how she saw him now? The girls ran into the room as excited as ever about his arrival. "Tommy! Tommy! Did you bring the game you promised?" Sophie asked, hopping around him. "Sophie, let him dry off first," Margaret gently scolded. Anne approached timidly and took his hand. "We made cookies for you." Claire, always more reserved, just smiled from across the room. But it was a smile full of trust and security, the smile of someone no longer afraid of being left behind. In that moment, Thomas realized the girls didn't see him as a visitor, or a benefactor, or even as their mother's former husband. They saw him as someone who had promised to stay, and was keeping that promise. The doubts that had once plagued him hadn't vanished completely. Sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night, questioning his motivations and fearing he wouldn't live up to his new responsibilities. But then he remembered Robert's words. Sometimes the heart finds what the mind never looked for, and knew he was on the right path. The life of Thomas Blackwood, the successful businessman, now included bike rides, bedtime stories, and 3 identical smiles that brightened his days. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the life his heart had found. And that was enough. It was a rainy Saturday, the kind made for staying indoors. Thomas arrived early, bringing hot chocolate and cookies for a special snack. Raindrops pelted the windows of the Blue House, creating a soft melody that blended with the triplets' laughter in the living room. They were watching cartoons, snuggled under the colorful blankets Thomas had bought for them the previous month. "It looks like we'll have to cancel our park trip," Thomas remarked, peering at the gray sky through the kitchen window. Margaret nodded as she arranged cups on a tray. "These spring rains show up without warning, but the girls don't seem to mind." Indeed, Claire, Anna, and Sophie were perfectly content to stay home, safe from the storm, knowing Thomas would spend the day with them, rain or shine. After their snack, Margaret decided to use the time to start cleaning out the small storage shed in the back of the house. It was a task she'd been putting off for months. "Can I help?" Thomas offered. Margaret hesitated. "There's a lot of old stuff out there. Dust, cobwebs, dampness. Not the right job for clothes as nice as yours." Thomas smiled and rolled up his sleeves. "I'll survive. Besides, I'm stronger than you are for moving the heavier boxes." The shed was a cramped, dimly lit space, with a single weak light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Boxes were stacked nearly to the top, some so old the edges were crumbling. There were pieces of furniture covered with sheets, rusted tools on the walls, and broken toys the girls had outgrown. "You keep everything," Thomas commented, amazed by the volume of items. "Old habits," Margaret replied. "When you've gone through hard times, you learn never to throw anything away. It might come in handy someday." They worked in silence for a while, Margaret separating what could be donated or discarded, Thomas moving the heaviest boxes to the center of the room. The musty smell of the past filled the air. Then a box from a high shelf slipped as Thomas tried to grab it, hitting the floor with a dull thud and spilling its contents over the dusty wooden boards. Thomas knelt to gather the scattered items and stopped short. They were old notebooks, some with worn synthetic leather covers, others just plain school notebooks. All appeared well used, corners bent, stained with time. One had fallen open, revealing a page written in blue ink. Thomas recognized the handwriting at once. It was the same he'd seen on the short letters Elise used to send with money. A knot formed in his throat. "These are hers," he said, looking at Margaret. The older woman slowly approached, as though seeing a ghost. She knelt stiffly beside Thomas, picking up one of the notebooks. Her fingers trembled slightly. "I never had the courage to read them," she admitted, running her hand over the worn cover. "When Elise left, she left a lot of things behind. I couldn't bring myself to throw anything away, so I stored it all here out of sight. But not out of your heart," Thomas finished. He still held the open notebook. These were words written long ago by a woman they had both loved, each in their own way, each in their own illusions. "Do you think we should—" The question hung in the air. Margaret stared at the notebook for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe it's time. Maybe we need to understand." They sat right there on the shed's dusty floor. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof, isolating them in a bubble of sound that felt oddly appropriate. Thomas began to read silently. The earliest entries dated back to Elise's pregnancy. The handwriting was rounder then, more careful, as if each word had been measured. The entries spoke of joy, excitement for the arrival of the babies, but also fear, a fear that grew with each new line. 3 babies. The doctor confirmed it today. 3 little hearts beating inside me. How will I take care of 3 babies on my own? Mom says she'll help, but it's so much to ask. She already works too much. I feel like my life ended before it really began. I should be in college right now, not expecting triplets from a man who didn't even stick around to find out. Thomas turned the page, feeling like an intruder in the most intimate thoughts of his late wife. But something compelled him to keep reading. They were born today, so small, so perfect. 3 miniature versions of me, Claire, Anne, and Sophie. I chose the names thinking of strong women from literature. I hope they're stronger than their mother. Mum cried when she saw them for the first time. I don't think I've ever seen her so happy, even with all the worry. There were sketches, too. Delicate drawings of the 3 sleeping babies. Details of their little hands and feet. Their almost identical expressions. Elise had a real gift for drawing, something Thomas never knew about the woman he'd married. So many things he never knew. The next entries revealed growing exhaustion, frustration, and a deepening despair, day by day. I haven't slept in 3 days. When one stops crying, the other starts. Mom makes it look so easy. She smiles and sings while changing diapers, like it's the most natural thing in the world. To me, it's like climbing a mountain with no end. I love my daughters, but I feel like I'm disappearing a little more each day. Then came the entry that made Thomas's heart tighten. I decided today. I'm leaving. I can't be the mother they deserve. I see how they calm down when Grandma appears. She'll do a better job alone. I'll send money as much as I can. One day, when I'm ready, when I have something to offer besides this constant feeling of failure, I'll come back. Will they hate me? How do I explain I had to leave so I wouldn't destroy them with my inability? Thomas looked at Margaret. Silent tears were streaming down the older woman's face. There was no accusation in her expression, only deep, long-standing sorrow. "You knew?" he asked softly. "I suspected," she replied. Elise was always intense about everything. When she loved completely. When she suffered, it was as if the world was ending. I saw in her eyes that she was drowning. I tried to help, but maybe I only made it worse by making it all look so easy. What for her was impossible. Thomas flipped through the pages again. In the following years, Elise wrote less frequently, but she always mentioned her daughters. It's their birthday today. 3 years old. Mom sent photos. They're so big now, so different from what I remember. Sophie seems the happiest. Anne has my eyes, that dreamy look. Claire has my stubbornness, Mom says. I bought 3 matching dresses in different colors, but I didn't have the courage to send them. What would I write on the card? Sorry for not being there, but here are some dresses. I put them in a box, along with all the other gifts I buy but never send. There were fragments of letters never sent, explanations, apologies, promises, all broken off midway, as though Elise couldn't find the right words or simply lost her courage. Dear daughters, there is so much I want to say. But how do I make you understand that I left because I loved you, not because... Mom, I know you must hate me for what I did, but you need to know. Claire, Anne, Sophie, one day, I hope I have the courage to look you in the eye and say that not a single day has passed without me. Then came the final entry, written just a few months before her death. I met someone. Thomas, he's kind, smart, successful. He treats me like I matter, like I have worth. He doesn't know about my past, about what I left behind. Sometimes I think about telling him about the girls. The words reach my lips, but then I freeze. What if he despises me? How do I explain that I abandoned 3 daughters? What if he wants to meet them? How do I explain why I never went back? It's easier to keep these 2 worlds apart. My past there, my present here. But the guilt never leaves, ever. It's in my veins, in my blood. I breathe guilt every single day. Maybe it's my punishment. Thomas closed the notebook, feeling the weight of Elise's words, words never spoken, feelings never shared, secrets she had taken to her grave. Next to him, Margaret wiped her tears with a trembling hand. Her shoulders, always so straight, now seemed bowed under the weight of these revelations. She blamed herself, the older woman said, her voice shaky. Every day, but never found the courage to come back. Or to tell the truth, Thomas added, to any of us. They sat there for a long time, surrounded by Elise's silences, which now echoed louder than ever. The rain still fell outside, washing the world clean, while inside that cramped shed, something had changed between them. A secret kept for years was finally out, bringing pain, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. St. Mary Academy's auditorium was packed that evening. Parents and relatives filled every seat, cameras and phones at the ready to capture the special moment. It was recital night, and the 3rd grade students were putting on a play about protecting nature. Thomas arrived late. A last-minute meeting with foreign investors had run over, and he had to drive over the speed limit to make it in time. He parked clumsily and hurried inside, holding 3 small bouquets of flowers. Good evening, sir. May I see your ticket? The usher asked. Thomas patted his pockets in a panic. He'd forgotten his invitation in the rush. I'm Thomas Blackwood. I'm here for the Green Triplets recital. Claire, Anne, and Sophie. The usher checked his list and nodded. Ah, yes, Mrs. Green told us you'd be coming. You can go in, but you'll have to stand at the back. The show has already started. Thomas slipped into the darkened auditorium. On stage, a group of children dressed as trees were singing about the importance of forests. He rose on tiptoe, trying to spot the girls among the little actors. He couldn't see Margaret anywhere. After the trees' song, the scenery changed to a blue ocean, with colorful fish and sea creatures. That's when Thomas saw them. The 3 of them, wearing matching sparkly starfish costumes, walked onto the stage hand in hand. Sophie led the line, her face lit up by a radiant smile. Anne followed, looking a bit nervous but determined. Claire brought up the rear, serious and focused, always the most responsible one. A surge of pride filled Thomas's chest. They looked amazing. The triplets took center stage and began reciting in unison. We are the stars of the deep ocean blue. We shine in the waters all around you. We need clean seas so we can survive. Please stop throwing trash. Keep our oceans alive." The audience applauded, and Thomas clapped louder than anyone. When the girls had finished their lines, they scanned the darkened audience eagerly. Thomas could see their little eyes searching for familiar faces in the crowd. He decided to chance it. He stepped forward toward a more illuminated section of the aisle. Sophie spotted him first, her face lighting up like a beacon. She nudged Anne, who nudged Claire. Within seconds, all three were staring straight at him, smiling bright enough to light the whole theater. The rest of the show went smoothly. The starfish were replaced by dolphins, sharks, and whales, each group delivering its own message about protecting the oceans. When the performance ended and the lights came on, Thomas joined the other parents waiting by the backstage exit. He spotted Margaret before she saw him, seated on a bench nearby, looking tired but proud. "Margaret," he said, approaching. "The girls were fantastic." She smiled, but there was something sad in her eyes. "They were, weren't they?" "Thank you for coming, Thomas. I wasn't sure you'd make it with that important meeting." "I promised them," he replied simply, "and promises are meant to be kept." Just then, the backstage door swung open, and the children began pouring out, still in their colorful costumes, running into the arms of their loved ones. Thomas spotted the triplets, still holding hands, looking around excitedly. When they saw him, their faces lit up. "Tommy!" they shouted in unison, rushing toward him. He knelt down to receive them, almost knocked over by the force of three little bodies colliding with him at the same time. "You came! You really came!" Sophie shouted, jumping for joy. "Did you see our part?" Anne asked, worried he might have missed it. "We did everything right," Claire stated matter-of-factly. "No mistakes." Thomas laughed, hugging all three at once. "I did see it, and you were the best starfish in all the oceans. And I brought each of you a present." He handed each a small bouquet of flowers, yellow daisies for Sophie, violets for Anne, and white lilies for Claire. Each bouquet had a different combination, specially chosen for their personalities. "They're beautiful," Sophie exclaimed, burying her nose in the petals. "I've never gotten flowers before," Anne said shyly. Claire looked down at her bouquet with a serious expression. "I'm going to press mine so I can keep them forever." Margaret watched from a distance. She saw how her granddaughters looked at Thomas with complete adoration, how he answered each of their questions with patience and genuine attention. The bond between them was almost tangible, like an invisible thread connecting them. In that moment, Margaret felt something stir in her chest, a mix of gratitude and fear. Gratitude to see her granddaughters happy, loved by someone besides her, and fear, a silent fear growing within her like a seed planted in fertile ground. In the days following the recital, that fear grew. Margaret noticed how often the girls talked about Thomas, how they counted the days until his next visit, how they saved special stories to share with him. "Tommy said he'll take us to see the whales at the aquarium," Sophie mentioned during dinner, "and he promised to show me a book about stars," Claire added. "He fixed my doll," Anne said, showing off the toy whose arm Thomas had skillfully reattached. Margaret smiled and nodded, but inside, doubt gnawed at her. What if one day Thomas decided he wanted the girls to live with him? After all, he had resources she would never have. He could give the triplets a life of comfort and opportunity. Or worse, what if one day the girls themselves decided they'd rather live with him? A big house, trips, gifts. How could her simple home compare? One evening, after Thomas left following dinner, Margaret sat alone in the living room. The girls were already in bed, sleeping the carefree sleep of childhood. She took an old photo from the drawer of the end table, Elise as a teenager, holding the newborn triplets. "I can't lose them too," she whispered to the photo, a solitary tear rolling down her wrinkled cheek. "I've already lost you. They're all I have left." In the days that followed, Margaret tried to hide her worries, but Thomas knew her too well by now. He noticed she was more reserved, that at times she fell silent, watching him interact with the girls with an unreadable expression. One Sunday afternoon, while the triplets played in the yard, Thomas finally brought it up. "Is everything okay, Margaret? You seem worried lately." The older woman tried to smile. "Just tired. It's not easy keeping up with three little whirlwinds," Thomas nodded, unconvinced. Are you sure that's all? Margaret hesitated. Should she share her fears, reveal her vulnerability to the man who, in her nightmares, might take her granddaughters away? You've done so much for them, she began cautiously. The girls adore you. They talk about you all the time. I adore being with them too, Thomas replied, still not understanding her point. She took a deep breath. Sometimes I wonder... What do you really want, Thomas? Long-term... Thomas frowned, confused. What do you mean? You're a wealthy man, used to getting what you want. The girls are part of a lease. The only part left. Margaret twisted her hands in her lap. I worry that one day you'll decide you want more than visits. At last, Thomas understood. You think I want to take them from you? It wasn't a question. Margaret only nodded, unable to speak. Thomas paused, looking at the triplets playing in the yard. Sophie was trying to catch butterflies, Anne was drawing with chalk, and Claire was reading a book under a tree. Margaret, he said softly but firmly, I didn't come here to replace anyone. Not you, not Elise's memory. I don't want to take anything away from you. I just want to be around. They have you, they always have. I only want to be someone they can rely on. He hesitated, then continued, I know it must be hard. I'm a stranger who showed up out of the blue, connected to them only through a marriage to someone who left. I understand your mistrust, but I need you to know that I respect what you've done and continue to do for these girls. You raised 3 wonderful children on your own, with limited means. That takes a special kind of strength. Margaret felt tears forming in her eyes. I'm not here to judge anyone, Thomas went on. Not Elise for her choices, nor you for yours. I'm here because somehow those 3 little girls have become important to me. And I want to help, however I can, for as long as I'm allowed to. The words ran deep. Margaret looked at Thomas, truly looked, and for the first time since he came into their lives, she didn't see a rich man or her daughter's ex-husband, but simply a man trying to do the right thing, offering love where there was room to receive it. Thank you, she said simply. Thomas smiled. We're a team now, right? You and I taking care of them together in our own ways. Margaret nodded, and for the first time since Thomas's arrival, she smiled in genuine relief. A weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying seemed to lift off her shoulders. Just then, Sophie ran over from the yard, cupping something in her hands. Grandma! Tommy! Look what I found! It's a ladybug with different spots. Thomas and Margaret leaned closer to see the tiny insect, while Sophie excitedly explained her discovery. With Anne and Claire soon joining in, the 2 adults exchanged a glance above the girls' heads. No more words were needed. There was a new understanding between them, a budding trust. Their bonds no longer involved just Thomas and the triplets, but Margaret as well, forming a stronger, unexpected family than any of them ever anticipated. The doubts hadn't disappeared. Rarely do they vanish in an instant. But there was now room for trust to grow and fear to fade. Most importantly, there was love at the core of it all, for 3 little girls who deserved every bit of happiness life could offer. Fall had turned the leaves red and gold when Claire startled Thomas with an unexpected request. They were seated at the kitchen table after dinner. Margaret was washing dishes and Thomas was helping the girls with their math homework. Tommy, Claire said, lifting her eyes from her notebook, can we visit Mom's grave with you? The pencil stopped in Thomas's hand. Sophie and Anne also paused, turning to look at their sister and then at Thomas, waiting for his reply. Of course, he finally said. If your grandma agrees. Margaret, who had heard everything, turned from the sink, drying her hands on her apron. Why do you want that now, Claire? She asked gently. The girl shrugged, trying to appear casual, but unable to hide her emotion. It's been a while since we last went, and we want to show her something. Margaret and Thomas exchanged glances. Ever since discovering Elise's notebooks, a new understanding had settled among them all. The girls, now knowing more about their mother, her struggles, her fears, her failures, seemed to be processing everything in their own way. Sunday, Thomas decided. We'll go on Sunday if the weather's good. On Sunday morning, the sky was clear, bathed in that golden light only autumn can bring. Thomas arrived early at the Blue House, finding all four already dressed. Sophie held a small bouquet of daisies from the garden, the same kind they'd taken the first time. Anne carried a pink envelope, and Claire had a small backpack. The cemetery was a 20-minute drive. They made the trip in silence, each lost in thought. In the back seat, the girls whispered occasionally, fussing over something inside Anne's envelope. The cemetery was quiet that morning, with few visitors. A gentle breeze rustled the treetops, causing a swirl of golden leaves to drift across the graves. "Can we go ahead?" Claire asked. Margaret nodded, and the three walked along the stone path. Thomas offered his arm to Margaret, who accepted with a small smile. They followed the girls at a respectful distance. "They've planned something," Margaret murmured. "I can tell," Thomas replied. "Should we be concerned?" Margaret shook her head. "No. They need to find their own way to say goodbye, to understand." When they reached Elise's headstone, the triplets were already there. Sophie placed the flowers on the grave. Anne held the open envelope. Claire removed something from her backpack, a small music box like the one they used to listen to before bed. "Can we come closer?" Thomas asked softly. Claire nodded. "We want to read something to Mom. We wrote it together." Thomas and Margaret stepped forward. The simple stone bore only Elise's name and her birth and death dates. There was no epitaph, no farewell message. Anne pulled a folded sheet of paper from the envelope and opened it carefully. The three stood side by side. Claire wound up the music box, which began to play a soft lullaby. The girls exchanged looks and began reading together, their voices small but steady. "Dear Mum, we know you left when we were too little to remember. Grandma always said you loved us but had to work far away. Now we know the truth. We know you were sad and scared. We found your notebooks, and Tommy helped us understand some parts. You wrote that you didn't know how to be a good mom, but you gave us the best grandma in the world, and now we have Tommy too. We want you to know that we forgive you, Mom. We hope that wherever you are, you're not sad or scared anymore. With love, Claire, Anne, and Sophie." The lullaby continued for a few more seconds after their last word. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. Next to him, Margaret wiped away silent tears. The girls stood motionless, gazing at the headstone as if awaiting a response. Finally, Sophie bent down and placed the letter beneath the flowers. "Do you think she can hear us?" she asked, looking at Thomas. He knelt down beside her at eye level with all three. "I like to believe she can," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and I'm sure she'd be very proud of you." Claire, always pragmatic, frowned. "Proud why?" "Because forgiving is one of the hardest and bravest things anyone can do," Thomas explained. "Especially when it hurts so much. You three are stronger than she ever imagined." Anne stepped forward and hugged Thomas. Sophie and Claire joined in too. Margaret placed her hand on Thomas's shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. There, under the autumn sun, with golden leaves drifting around them, something found closure. Not just the girls' forgiveness of their absent mother, but also a deeper acceptance of all that had happened. On the way back to the car, Margaret briefly took Thomas's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. He gave her hand a small squeeze, understanding everything unspoken in her words. In the following weeks, Thomas seemed distant, often making quiet phone calls that he ended whenever someone approached. One day, he arrived with a folder and asked to speak to Margaret in private. The girls went to play in the yard while the two stayed in the kitchen. "I found something I want you to see," he said, opening the folder on the table. "No need to decide now, just think about it." Inside were photos of a house, a large, beautiful house with a yard and trees all around. There were also floor plans showing spacious bedrooms, a wide kitchen, a cozy living room. "It's a house," Thomas explained, "near the park, about 10 minutes from St. Mary Academy. It has a bedroom for each girl, one for you, and even a guest room." He flipped a few pages, showing pictures of the backyard. In one corner was a small glass greenhouse, perfect for plants and flowers. "For your herbs," he said. "I know how you like growing them." Margaret remained silent, studying the photos. It was the kind of home she had always wished she could provide for her granddaughters. "We can't accept something like this," she said finally. closing the folder. "Why not?" Thomas asked. It's too much. You've already done so much for us." Thomas gave a soft smile. "Margaret, have you ever thought about what you and the girls have done for me?" She looked at him, confused. "Before I met them, I had a big, empty house. I had money, successful businesses, but I came home to silence every night. Now, I have laughter, stories, little hands pulling me to see a new drawing." He paused. "You've given me a family. There's no price for that." Margaret felt tears filling her eyes. It was true. Thomas had changed since that first hesitant visit. The once rigid man now laughed easily, sat on the floor to play board games, and didn't mind if his trousers got stained with grass. "The girls need room to grow," he went on. "Claire needs a quiet spot to study. Anne needs a space for her art. Sophie needs a bigger garden to explore. And you, Margaret, you need a place where you can rest." She knew he was right. The small blue house was getting cramped. The girls shared one tiny bedroom, their books and toys scattered wherever there was space. "Can I think about it?" Margaret asked softly. "Of course," Thomas replied. "Take all the time you need." Fate sped up the decision. A few days later, during a fierce storm, the blue house's roof partially collapsed, causing a major leak in the girls' bedroom. Water damaged part of the ceiling, leaving a musty smell that wouldn't go away. "Fixing it will cost a fortune," Margaret lamented after the repairman left. "And it still won't solve everything. The whole structure is compromised." Thomas, who had come to help with the emergency, just nodded, saying nothing about the new house. 2 days later, Margaret was the one who brought it up. "That house you showed me, is it still available?" Thomas smiled. "It is, and it's ready whenever you are." Margaret finally yielded. She could see the worry in the girls' eyes whenever they looked at the water stains on the ceiling. She heard Claire coughing in the morning because of the dampness. She knew the house, with all its required repairs, would soon become an unbearable burden. The move was scheduled for the end of the month. Thomas handled all the logistics, moving company, sat paperwork, even transferring the phone line. When they told the girls, their reaction was pure joy. "We're going to have a room all to ourselves," Sophie asked in disbelief. "Each of you will have your own room," Thomas corrected. Their eyes grew as wide as if they just heard they would be living in a castle. "Can I paint mine lavender?" Anne asked timidly. "Can I have a big shelf for my books?" Claire wanted to know. "Can I have a bird perch by my window?" Sophie inquired. Thomas laughed. "You can have whatever you want. It's your house now." On moving day, the girls ran around exploring every corner. It was a beautiful house with bright walls and large windows. A wooden staircase with a sturdy banister perfect for sliding down, as Sophie soon discovered. The kitchen was spacious, with enough cabinets for all of Margaret's utensils. The living room had a fireplace, perfect for cold winter days. But the real magic was in the girls' bedrooms. Thomas had prepared each one based on their personalities. Claire's had floor-to-ceiling shelves, a small desk with an antique wooden chair, and an armchair by the window, perfect for reading. Anne's had an easel, boxes of paint and pencils, and an entire wall painted a soft lavender. Sophie's, the most colourful, featured a mural of nature scenes, birds, squirrels, and butterflies. When the girls saw their rooms, they were momentarily speechless. Then they ran to hug Thomas, nearly knocking him over with their triple embrace. "Thank you, Tommy," Sophie shouted. "It's the most beautiful bedroom in the world," Anne whispered. "How did you know exactly what I wanted?" asked Claire, always analytical. Thomas grinned. "I've been paying attention." Margaret, standing in the doorway, had tears in her eyes. Thomas had also prepared a room for her, with a comfortable bed, a restored antique trunk, and an armchair by the window overlooking the garden and the little greenhouse. While the girls explored the house, she approached Thomas. "How can I ever thank you?" she asked, voice trembling with emotion. Thomas shook his head. "You don't have to. This is your home. I'm just repaying the kindness you've shown me." Margaret smiled. "You're a good man, Thomas Blackwood. Elise was lucky to have found you." "I was the lucky one," he replied, "because all of you let me in, even after everything." The rest of the day was spent unpacking. The few pieces of furniture from the blue house looked small in the larger rooms, but they gave a cozy, familiar touch. Thomas had already provided the essentials: new beds, a couch, a dining table, appliances, but left plenty of room for them to bring their own belongings, making it truly theirs. By late afternoon, when the moving truck had gone and the most important boxes were unpacked, Thomas made a suggestion. How about a picnic in the backyard to celebrate? The idea was met with enthusiasm. They grabbed blankets, sandwiches, and juice, and settled on the lawn under a big tree. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in pink and orange hues. The girls explored the new yard, discovering a swing on a low branch, a small fish pond with colorful koi, and a patch of wildflowers that attracted butterflies. As the first star appeared, everyone lay down on the grass to stargaze. Thomas pointed out constellations, sharing stories about each. The girls listened, fascinated, asking questions and making up their own explanations. Margaret, lying between Thomas and her granddaughters, gazed at the sky with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Life had taken so many turns since she first held those 3 newborns. So many difficulties, so many sleepless nights, so many sacrifices. Now here they were, all together under the same starry sky in a new home. Sometimes, she said quietly, life circles back from another direction, and we start over. Thomas looked over at her, understanding the depth of those simple words. The girls, tired but happy, snuggled closer to their grandma, their heads seeking that familiar lap. There, in that new yard beneath an ancient sky, a different kind of family was taking shape. One born not of blood or convention, but of love, of choice, of belonging. Thomas watched the 4 figures beside him, the resilient grandmother and the 3 girls who had changed his life. He wasn't their father, nor did he intend to replace anyone. He was simply there, constant, reliable, caring. And for the first time since losing Elise, he felt he was exactly where he should be. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.